Right about now, you are listening to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, a show where we discuss living as a leader worth following, leading others to do the same, and in doing so, leaving a legacy for future generations. My name is Jimmie Gonzalez Jr., a learning and development professional and leadership coach, sitting down with my co-host Anthony Devon Watts Jr., an expert contact center leader that has effectively led and developed dynamic teams with high motivation. Together, we have over 30 years experience in the corporate game. Join us as we discuss our growth as leaders, share the lessons we've learned, and interview others to see how their leadership style was shaped as they were mentored by adversity. So one of the first things that you want to think about, that word affinity, it has to be, and you mentioned this already, it has to be a high performing team. But what makes it a high performing team? It's speed of execution, right? Speed of execution and being able to execute at a very, very high level. So when you think about the definition, the depth of trust and confidence in a relationship is very high within a team, which again results in that speed of execution or maximum velocity of production. So a lot of trust, a lot of high confidence, and again, being able to execute at a very high level, but do it very, very fast. In our everyday life, right, in corporate America, there's so many different practices going on, so many very important initiatives going on, and you would like the luxury of being able to, kind of take your time with things, but sometimes you're not. More times than not, you're not afforded that luxury, right? And you have to be able to execute very quickly, very decisively. But in order for, sometimes that's a little bit easier to do as an individual, but with the team, there has to be a lot of trust there and confidence in one another. We talked about it in the last episode, so if you're taking some of those concepts about how you empower people, if you're doing those things and working on those things, that's going to help, right, to build trust in your folks, and that's going to help to build their trust level in you as a leader. But point blank, moving with velocity, speed of execution, and doing so with excellence.
Okay. So when you say moving with velocity and speed of execution, and one of the things that comes to mind, like as you're saying that, and not that I'm by any stretch of the imagination like a fan of it, but it's like NASCAR racing, like a pit crew, right? Like I just that is one thing that I am like actually pretty impressed by within the sport, is just the level of communication, coordination, and execution during the pit stops. Like how quick that is, how fast that is, right? Because you're racing against the clock, you're racing against the other racers, right? Like I could be, when my car gets pitted, I could be in first place, and we're trying to time the pit properly, right? Because we don't want to have to make any other stops, for the duration of the race. And so there's a little bit of strategy there, but during that, like in that split couple of seconds, there's like 17 people they were rolling out. Somebody changing the tire, somebody's checking the levels, somebody, making sure the driver's hydrated and the driver has what they need. And all of that is happening simultaneously, and nobody's stumbling over one another. Everybody's communicating. Everybody knows where people should be. There's a high level of trust. Nobody's thinking, oh, is he getting that tire? Because he's supposed to get that tire, and I'm supposed to get this tire. Like everybody has trust in their peer to execute on the task at hand, and they do it so fast, and then they're right back on the track. And so that's the thing that comes to mind when you're talking about, a team with high affinity. And being able to execute quickly or speed of execution, all those things. Like I keep picturing NASCAR, and and that's really all I know about them outside of like Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Jimmie Johnson or something like that.
No, that's a really a good analogy though, for all the reasons that you just mentioned. As you're talking, I can see that picture in my mind, and like you said, there's just a lot of trust, and everybody knows their role. Right, you have certain guys that are focusing on filling up the gas tank. You have the other guys or gals that are focusing on changing the tires. You may have one or two that, one's taking one off, somebody's handing the other tire. So everybody knows their role and they do it well, right? And there's a very high level of competence, within each of those skills. And with that high level of confidence and that high level of trust, they're able to execute, to that standard. And again, at that speed.
Gotcha. So I would say transparently, right? If we're thinking about how do I know if I have a team that has high affinity, have I created or built or cultivated an environment where I have a team with high affinity? I think, selfishly, sometimes us as leaders, we have the opinion that we do, and we have like, oh yeah, my team has that for sure, right? But you know how I am. I'm a little bit more grounded or rooted in, facts and data. And so I'm curious, 'cause I know you've taught on this subject quite a bit and just broken it down with other leaders. Is there a process or a way for me to assess, like if I'm a leader, like how would I start to assess what is the current affinity level of my team, right? Like going back to my Marvel my Marvel thought that came to mind, like how do I know how many stones I've secured, right? Do I have like all 5 of them? Do I just got the Gauntlet by itself? Do I got like the Time Stone and the Mind Stone, but everything else is not on point? So like how can I assess where my team is currently at, take stock of where my team is currently at, so that I can either celebrate and continue to do the things that have created high affinity, or I can pivot?
So knowing you and what you just said, right? So being all about the numbers and the data, like the first thing you have to look at is, are we hitting the mark? Are we achieving results? But then are we doing so at a very high level, right? So in your business, in your space, you know what those KPIs are, those performance metrics that you're looking at to hit. Are we doing that at a high level, not just kind of subpar or just meeting, but are we doing so at a high level, and then are we doing that at a consistent basis, right? If you're seeing that in the numbers, then you can kind of start to kind of reverse engineer and say, okay, well, what's getting us to that point? If you're not hitting your metrics, right? If you're not hitting your results and achieving results at high levels, then you're probably, especially if you're not doing it on a consistent basis, then you're probably not high in affinity, right? So that's number one. Are we achieving some results and doing so at a high level? But then again, how did we get there? In order to get results, especially again at a high level, and to do so on a consistent basis, like you have to be willing to take risk, but doing so in a calculated manner, right? Especially the higher you go. You said something last, a couple of weeks ago, and leaders who have leaders and leaders who have leaders that are leaders, and I'm like, say that 4 times really, really fast. I was just getting tongue-tied listening to you say that. But the higher you go, right? And the more responsibility that you have, you still want to take risks, but you have to be very, very calculated in the risks that you take, because there's a lot of people counting on you. Again, the higher that you go up the ladder and the more responsibility that you have, you're not just representing yourself or the team. I mean, you're also representing the company, so you got to be very calculated in the risks that you take. But then some of the things that you might not necessarily be able to see on a spreadsheet. And again, it gets back to trust. So you can still analyze these things when you're having conversations on an individual basis, when you're having conversations with the team, when problems arise or when people are challenged and tough questions are asked. Are people sharing how they feel with no hesitation? That you can take, you can get the vibe of that on a conference call or in the room, right, when we're in that setting. And do people trust that they can express how they feel and do so in a professional manner, but express how they feel with, without any type of negative repercussion? And maybe it's not necessarily the best idea, but as a group and as a leader, you can take that and you can build upon that. You can find value in the information they're providing. But again, they're doing so without any hesitation. And then when your team members are coming to you and sharing their concerns, when they're sharing any issues that they're having, even when they're sharing accomplishments, it doesn't have to be negative things, but when they're coming to you and like they're excited and they're happy to share those things with you, then there's a deep level of connection and there's a deep level of trust, right? One of the last things as a leader that I want is to find out that there's some type of concern or problem or issues that a team member or that my team members are having, but like I had to find it out through the grapevine, as opposed to them, again, trusting that they can come and that we can talk through it and that we can resolve it, we can get stronger because of it, and we can work through those things. So if you're not seeing those things, then you can, be assured that your team is not necessarily a high performing team and not necessarily reaching that level of affinity where they are a well-oiled, high performing team.
Rage on that beat, going crazy.
You have just listened to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, hosted by Jimmie Gonzalez and Devon Watts. Thank you, and we hope that you live, lead, and leave a legacy worth remembering. Until next time.